All right, we're going to go on a bit of a linguistic investigation. We're going to peel back centuries of tradition to uncover the real meaning of a word you probably think you know, ekklesia.
So why does this one little word matter so much? Well, because it shows up over 100 times in the New Testament. This isn't some obscure term. It's a foundational concept, and, getting it right is kind of key. This is probably the most famous place it's used. Jesus himself says it, right? He's setting in motion this idea that would literally shape history and become the central term for Christian communities. Which, of course, brings us to the big question. When we hear ekklesia, we immediately think church. But is that what a person in the first century would have understood? That's the mystery we're here to solve. To solve that mystery, we first have to peel back all these layers of our own modern understanding and really get down to the historical truth of the word. This is a great way to think about how language actually works. We don't hear the word butterfly and think of butter and flies, do we? The word just means the insect. It's the same exact thing with ekklesia. Even though it's technically formed from Greek words that mean out and to call, first-century listeners didn't break it down like that. For them, it just had a single common meaning. And that meaning? It was incredibly concrete. An ekklesia was simply an assembly, a gathering of actual people in a physical place. It wasn't some mystical concept or an abstract identity. It was something you could literally see and point to.
So, if it's just an ordinary word for assembly, where's the proof? Well, funny enough, the clearest evidence in the entire New Testament comes not from a church service, but from a full-blown riot.
This is just a perfect example. The author of Acts is describing this chaotic mob in the city of Ephesus, and the word he chooses is ekklesia. Now, this group wasn't Christian, it wasn't organized at all, it was just a confused crowd, but because they were physically assembled together, they were an ekklesia. And then, just like that, the story ends. The town clerk comes in, dismisses the crowd, and tells everyone to just go home. So the people disperse. And that one little moment, that moment of dispersal, it reveals a really simple but profound test. When people are physically gathered, the ekklesia exists, but the moment they scatter, the ekklesia is gone. The individuals are still around, of course, but the assembly, the event, is over.
So why did the apostles choose this specific, ordinary word? Well, they didn't just pick it out of thin air. It already had a super rich history, a history that built a bridge all the way back to the Old Testament.
You can actually see the direct linguistic line right here. In the original Hebrew scriptures, the word for the assembly of Israel was kahal. Now, when those scriptures were translated into Greek a few centuries later, the word they chose to translate kahal was, you guessed it, ekklesia. This means the apostles were intentionally picking a word that was already loaded with the history of God's assembled people. And the New Testament itself makes this connection totally explicit. Here, in the book of Acts, the speaker is talking about the entire nation of Israel gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai. And what does he call them? He calls them the Ekklesia in the wilderness. Okay, so we have the everyday Greek meaning, and we have the deep Old Testament roots. Now let's see how the apostles consistently used this word when they were writing to the very first Christian communities. Pay really close attention to the specific Greek phrase the Apostle Paul uses here, epi to auto. It literally means into one place. There's just no ambiguity there. The ekklesia he's writing to is a group of people who physically gather together in a single location. And we see this same pattern in other writings too. The focus is always on the action of assembling. It's a behavior. This just reinforces the idea that an ekklesia is something believers do. They physically gather. It's not just an identity they are. Okay, so after all this linguistic deep dive, we have to ask the most important question, right? So what? Who cares if it means assembly or church? Why does this definition actually matter?
This slide lays out the two competing ideas perfectly. On one side, you have the original meaning, ekklesia as a physical assembly, an action that believers do. On the other side, you have the more modern interpretation, ekklesia as an abstract institution, an identity that believers just are. And the stakes here are so much higher than you might think. This isn't just some word game. As this slide shows, how you define ekklesia creates this powerful ripple effect. That initial definition, it shapes a community's entire structure. Then the structure dictates its practices, what people actually do when they get together. And in the end, those practices, they shape core beliefs. It all flows from that one definition.
Which leaves us with a final and pretty provocative question.
If an ekklesia is fundamentally an action you do, not just an identity you are, what does that change about everything? And that's something to think about.